The first body stopped us cold. It lay crumpled at the base of a massive Douglas fir, partially hidden by ferns. At first glance, it looked like a heap of discarded clothing, but the smell, sweet and coppery with decay, told a different story. Noah approached it cautiously, his training taking over. "Probably mid-30s, he reported clinically, though I could hear the strain in his voice. "Been dead maybe 2 days. Hard to tell with these injuries." I forced myself to look closer. The man was dressed for hiking, wearing expensive outdoor gear that was now shredded and caked with dried blood. His pack lay nearby, its contents scattered as if something had rifled through them. But it was the injuries that made my stomach lurch. His body had been torn apart with surgical precision. Long parallel cuts ran from throat to navel, the edges too clean for animal claws. The chest cavity was empty, organs removed with what appeared to be deliberate care. His face was untouched, frozen in an expression of absolute terror. Jimmy turned away and vomited into the bushes. I couldn't blame him. In 20 years of hunting, I'd never seen anything like this. This wasn't a predator kill. This was something else entirely. "Look at this," Noah said, holding up the man's wallet. "Montana driver's license, Thomas Wheeler from Missoula. Another hunter." I shook my head. No weapon, no hunting license in the wallet. Maybe a hiker or photographer. "He's got a camera," Jimmy said, having recovered enough to examine the scattered gear. He held up a high-end DSLR, its lens shattered, memory cards missing. Before we could discuss it further, that moaning sound echoed through the trees again, closer this time. We instinctively drew together, backs to each other, scanning the surrounding forest. The shadows seemed to move, though there was no wind. "We need to call this in," Noah said, reaching for his satellite phone. He cursed. "No signal. We're in a dead zone." "We can't leave," I said, thinking of Ricky's voice on the radio. "He's still out there." Jimmy checked his rifle for the 100th time. "What if we're not the only ones looking for him?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Something had killed Thomas Wheeler, something that didn't hunt like any natural predator. And now that same something might be hunting us. We pressed on, following a game trail that showed signs of recent passage, broken branches, disturbed leaf litter, and more of that strange, clear substance that seemed to be everywhere. The moaning sound came more frequently now, sometimes accompanied by a high-pitched chittering that set my teeth on edge. The trail led us to a small clearing where the trees had been bent and broken in a rough circle, their trunks twisted as if by enormous force. The ground was covered in deep impressions, like something massive had paced back and forth. And there, in the center of it all, was Ricky's satellite phone, smashed to pieces. "Blood," Noah said quietly, pointing to dark stains on the leaves. "A lot of it." I was about to respond when movement caught my eye, something large shifting in the shadows at the clearing's edge. We all saw at this time our weapons coming up automatically. For a moment, nothing moved. Then a shape emerged from the darkness and everything I thought I knew about the natural world collapsed. The creature that stepped into the clearing walked on 2 legs, but that's where any resemblance to anything natural ended. It stood at least 9 feet tall, its body a grotesque fusion of features that shouldn't exist together. The torso was vaguely ursine, but stretched and distorted, covered in patches of hairless skin that seemed to shift and ripple. Its arms were too long, ending in hands with elongated fingers tipped with curved metallic-looking claws. But it was the face that struck true horror into my soul. It was almost feline in structure, but the proportions were wrong, as if someone had tried to sculpt a mountain lion's head from memory and gotten everything slightly incorrect. The eyes were the worst part. Huge, lidless orbs that reflected the dim light like mirrors, with too many pupils floating in seas of absolute blackness. The creature's mouth opened, revealing row upon row of needle-sharp teeth. And that same moaning sound filled the air, but this time we could see its source. The sound wasn't coming from its throat, but from holes that dotted its body, opening and closing like grotesque gills. The sound was both a beacon and a warning, a call that seemed to ripple through the very ground beneath our feet. Noah fired first, his pistol shots echoing through the clearing. The bullets struck the creature's torso, but instead of blood, clear fluid erupted from the wounds, the same substance we'd been finding on the trees. The thing didn't flinch. If anything, it seemed amused, its face contorting into what might have been a smile. "Run!" I shouted, but Jimmy was already moving, firing his rifle as he backpedaled. The creature's response was explosive. It crossed the clearing in two impossibly fluid strides, one elongated arm sweeping out to catch Jimmy across the chest. He went flying, his rifle spinning away into the underbrush. Noah and I split up, trying to divide its attention. The creature paused, its head swiveling between us with jerky, bird-like movements. That's when we heard the scream, human, desperate, and terrifyingly familiar. "Ricky!" I breathed. The sound had come from somewhere above us. The creature's head snapped toward me, those eyes fixed on me with unnatural intensity. It tilted its head in a way that no human or animal could, as if it was studying us, weighing its options. The scream echoed again, more frantic this time, and I knew we had to act fast. Noah didn't hesitate. He fired again, aiming for the creature's legs this time, trying to slow it down. But the bullets had no effect. The creature only tilted its head in a way that suggested it found our attempts laughable. "Ricky's up there," I said, my voice tight with urgency. "We need to get to him. Now." We moved as quickly as we could, pushing through the dense underbrush, trying to stay low and quiet. But it was clear we were no match for whatever this thing was. The air grew heavier with every step, a palpable weight pressing down on us as though the forest itself was alive, watching, waiting. The creature followed, its massive form moving through the trees with terrifying grace. It was toying with us, letting us think we might escape, only to remind us of its presence with every eerie sound and chilling movement. We reached a clearing at the edge of a steep ravine, where the sound of Ricky's voice grew louder, more desperate. But then, in a flash of movement, the creature lunged, faster than anything that size should have been. It swiped at me, its claws scraping across my jacket as I barely ducked in time. "Go!" I shouted to Noah, who was already moving toward the sound of Ricky's voice, guns blazing in an attempt to draw the creature's attention away from me. I sprinted after him, adrenaline coursing through my veins, knowing that if we didn't find Ricky soon, we might not have a chance at all. The creature's moan echoed behind us, a haunting reminder that we were not the hunters here. We were the hunted. As we neared the edge of the clearing, I saw him. Ricky. He was trapped, bound to a massive tree, his face pale, eyes wide with terror. The creature had him, and I realized with a sickening twist in my stomach that it wasn't just hunting us. It was feeding on us. "Ricky!" I screamed, but the words were swallowed by the surrounding forest. The creature turned its head toward us, its mouth opening wide in an almost mocking way, as if daring us to try and save him. Noah looked at me, his face grim. "We're running out of time." I knew he was right. But what could we do against something like that? We had to try, no matter what the cost. The community. Whispers spread like wildfire, and the elders grew more secretive, their expressions grave. The search for Warren continued for weeks, but with each passing day, the possibility of finding him alive seemed less likely. People began to avoid the old logging road, and the boundary between the charted and uncharted woods became a place of whispered fears rather than curiosity. The forest, once a familiar place of work and solace, had transformed into something alien, something that couldn't be trusted. I couldn't let it go. I knew the woods like the back of my hand, and I couldn't believe they held such a deep, unexplainable menace. The patterns of disappearances were too deliberate, too strange to ignore. I began to feel as if something was watching, waiting for us to cross the line, to take one step too far into its domain. The uncharted land had always been off-limits, but as I dug deeper into the investigation, the more I began to question why. The more I listened to the elders and to my own instincts, the clearer it became that these boundaries weren't just about keeping us safe. They were about protecting us from something older than us, something that existed long before human memory. I began to understand the way the woods held their secrets. Each tree, each rock, each whispering breeze seemed to be a part of a living history that humans couldn't comprehend. The forest wasn't just a place to walk through, it was a presence. And it had its own rules. As I ventured deeper, guided by memories of my uncle's warnings and the elders' cryptic words, I came to a disturbing realization. The forest wasn't just hiding something. It was drawing us in, pulling us toward the things that should never be known. And once you stepped beyond the boundary, there was no going back. Not for you, not for anyone. In the days that followed, as the search for Warren turned up only empty signs and whispered tales of strange happenings, I started preparing for the inevitable. I knew that whatever had taken him, whatever had taken Sarah Chen, was still there. It was patient. It waited. And the next person to vanish might just be me. This narrative paints a chilling picture of an ancient and malevolent force lurking in the woods, pushing against the boundaries of human knowledge and understanding. The tension builds as the protagonist, a ranger named Tai, begins to realize that something unnatural is drawing people into the uncharted land beyond an old logging road. These disappearances seem to be more than accidents. They are deliberate, and something ancient is at work. The atmosphere is thick with dread, from the eerie silence in the woods to the strange claw marks and unsettling journal entries. The reference to the forest people, or entities older than humans, with motives and ways beyond comprehension, heightens the mystery. These creatures, it seems, exist outside the realm of conventional understanding, and they're waking up, testing the boundaries, and showing signs of increasing aggression. The protagonist's decision to cross the boundary with a trusted companion, Derek, is a pivotal moment in the story. They prepare with an arsenal of tools and knowledge, but the forest itself seems to defy the laws of nature, growing denser and more surreal the deeper they go. The strange tracks, the unsettling clearing, and the terrifying encounter with an ancient creature confirm that they have crossed into something far more dangerous than they imagined. The creature they encounter seems to be both part of the forest and not, an ancient predator that doesn't simply hunt but unmake its prey. The horror of this encounter is not just in the creature's appearance but in its implications. It is a force that transcends human understanding, a being that exists to test the limits of reality. Ty and Derek's experience leaves them shaken and unsure of what to do next. The decision to report what they've seen is fraught with uncertainty. Will the council believe them? And even if they do, will it make things worse? The mention of the old stories about the forest, the balance between worlds, and the warnings from the elders suggest that knowing too much might be dangerous. The growing sense of dread, the unnerving silence, and the threat of the unknown make this a deeply unsettling story, one that touches on ancient fears about the wilderness and the things that might be hiding in its depths. It's a tale about boundaries, both physical and metaphysical, and the consequences of violating them. The narrative you've shared is rich with tension and foreboding, following a park ranger's struggle with an ancient supernatural force that dwells in the forest. The story expertly blends elements of folklore with a deep sense of unease as the ranger uncovers disturbing clues about the creature's evolving behavior and the ancient, forgotten agreements that govern the land. In a climactic sequence, the creature is confronted in the forest, revealing itself as a terrifying entity that defies natural laws, with a body that shifts and a presence that carries a chilling, chemical scent. The ranger's eventual encounter with the creature is full of visceral, high-stakes action, culminating in the creature's death and the lingering reminder that the forest and its guardians are not to be taken lightly. The closing sentiment brings a full circle to the idea that the forest is alive, remembering the past and holding secrets humans are not meant to unravel. It's a tale of respect for boundaries, for the ancient spirits and forces that have always existed in nature, waiting in the shadows for the moment when humanity forgets its place. The mix of survival horror, ancient myth, and the tension between modernity and the natural world creates a powerful atmosphere. The references to old teachings and the significance of listening to the land tie the entire experience together with a haunting resonance. Would you like to explore more of the themes, characters, or expand on this story? Some experiences are too much for the human mind to process. My grandmother was right about the old ways, about respecting what we don't understand. Modern life makes it easy to forget that we're not the only things that walk this earth. There are spaces between what we know and what we fear. And sometimes those spaces have teeth. I still guide people through these woods, sharing sanitized stories about local history and wildlife. But I keep my grandmother's warning words close to my heart now. When the forest falls silent, when the shadows move in ways they shouldn't, I remember what lies buried in that ravine, and I wonder if one day those rocks will be moved aside, and that smooth, blank face will once again emerge into our world. Sometimes, on particularly quiet nights, I drive out to the ranger station and check the security cameras that face that section of the forest. Nothing ever appears on the footage, but occasionally the cameras go dark for exactly 3 minutes and 12 seconds. The rangers blame it on equipment malfunction. I know better. The thing about monsters is that once you've seen them, you can't unsee them. They change the way you look at the world. Every shadow holds the potential for horror. Every silence carries the weight of anticipation. But maybe that's how we're supposed to live, aware that we're not alone, that we're not at the top of the food chain, that there are things in this world older and stranger than our civilized minds can comprehend. I still have the branch I used that night mounted above my fireplace. Sometimes late at night I swear I can hear it humming, resonating with something distant, but drawing closer. And when that happens, I remember my grandmother's final words to me, whispered from her deathbed. The watchers never sleep, Elijah. They just wait. The last bit of autumn light filtered through the dense pines as I wiped grease from my hands, studying the pickup truck's engine block with growing frustration. My name's Elon Kokok, and I've spent most of my life in these northern Wisconsin woods. The repair shop I run near Chihuahua isn't much to look at, just a weathered building with peeling paint and an old neon open sign that flickers more often than it glows. But it's mine, and I'm proud of it. My grandfather used to say that every piece of land holds its own stories, its own spirits. He taught me the old ways of our people, the Oneida, passing down traditions that some might call superstitious, but that I've always known as truth. Those teachings have stayed with me through the years, whispering in the back of my mind during quiet moments like this one, when the day begins to fade and shadows creep across the workshop floor. I'd been working on Mrs. Peterson's '98 Ford F-150 for the better part of the afternoon. The timing belt was shot, and the radiator had seen better days. But these were problems I could fix, simple mechanical issues with logical solutions. Unlike the other thing that had been troubling me lately, the strange atmosphere that had settled over the woods behind my shop like a heavy blanket. My dog, Noden, a battle-scarred German shepherd who'd been by my side for 8 years, lay near the shop's entrance. Usually he'd be sleeping, but today his ears were pricked forward, his body tense. Every few minutes he'd lift his head and let out a low growl, staring through the open door at the tree line beyond. "What's got you worked up, old boy?" I asked. though I already had my suspicions. We'd both been hearing things over the past few nights, sounds that didn't belong in these woods. I'd grown up hunting here, tracking deer through these trees since I was old enough to hold a rifle, but these noises were different, deeper, wrong. The sun was setting earlier now that October was drawing to a close, and the temperature had dropped enough that I could see my breath in the dim light of the shop. I reached for the thermostat, but before I could adjust it, Noden suddenly sprang to his feet, hackles raised, and let out a bark that echoed through the metal building. I'd been trying to ignore the signs for days, writing them off as paranoia or too many late nights alone in the shop. But there was no denying the way the wildlife had changed. The usual chorus of birds had gone quiet, and I hadn't seen a deer near the shop in over a week. Unusual for this time of year, when they typically grew bold, searching for food before winter set in. Of air as claws swept through the space where I'd been standing, the flashlight went flying, its beam spinning crazily through the trees before going dark. I rolled to my feet, drawing my hunting knife, even though I knew it would be useless against something this size. The creature turned to face me, rising to its full height, and in the dim light, I could see its mouth open and what looked almost like a grin, revealing rows of yellowed fangs. Noden, loyal to a fault, launched himself at the beast's leg, teeth sinking into its thick hide. The creature barely seemed to notice, casually swatting him aside with enough force to send him crashing into a nearby tree. The sound of his yelp cut through me like a knife. I had no time to check on him, though, as the creature's attention returned to me. It moved with that impossible speed again, but this time, I was ready. As it lunged, I ducked under its reaching claws and drove my knife up into its side with all my strength. The blade sank deep into flesh, and hot black blood poured over my hands. The roar it let out shook the trees, a sound of pain and rage that couldn't have come from any natural animal. Its claws caught my jacket, ripping through the heavy canvas and scoring lines of fire across my ribs. I stumbled backward, losing my grip on the knife, which remained buried in the creature's flesh. Just when I thought it was over, when I was sure I was about to die in these woods I'd known all my life, I heard Charlie's voice ring out through the trees. "Elon, get down!" I dropped without thinking, and the crack of his rifle split the night. The creature jerked as the bullet struck it, dark blood spraying from its shoulder. Charlie fired again and again, each shot finding its mark. But the beast seemed more enraged than hurt. It turned toward this new threat, giving me time to scramble away. Charlie stood his ground, working the bolt of his rifle with practiced speed, but I could see the terror on his face as the creature started moving toward him. Just as it tensed to spring, another shot rang out, this one from a different direction. The bullet caught the beast in the head, staggering it through the trees. I caught a glimpse of old Joe Thompson, my grandfather's friend and one of the tribal elders, holding his ancient .36 rifle. The creature seemed to hesitate, looking between its three opponents before finally turning and crashing away through the underbrush, leaving a trail of black blood in its wake. We found Noden alive, but hurt, whimpering softly where he'd fallen. My hand shook as I checked him over, finding bruised ribs but nothing broken, a miracle given the force with which he'd been thrown. Charlie helped me carry him back to the shop while old Joe covered our retreat, his rifle ready. Inside, under the harsh fluorescent light, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. My side was bleeding where the creature's claws had caught me, though the wounds weren't deep. Charlie's face was pale, and his hands trembled as he set his rifle down. "I've been hunting these woods for 40 years, he said, his voice hoarse. "Never seen anything like that. Never even heard of anything like that." Old Joe remained silent, staring out the shop's window into the darkness. Finally, he spoke, his voice grave. "The old stories speak of things that walk between worlds, creatures that don't belong in our reality, but find their way in sometimes. The elders called them the shadow walkers. I thought of my grandfather then, of all the stories he'd told me that I'd half believed. How many of them had been warnings rather than just tales? In the days that followed, we found more evidence of the creature's presence, more dead deer, torn apart and partially eaten, and tracks that led deeper into the forest before disappearing entirely. The local authorities blamed it on a rogue bear, but those of us who had seen it knew better. Old Joe gathered the tribal elders, and they performed ceremonies I hadn't seen since I was a child. They spoke of boundaries between worlds growing thin, of ancient powers stirring. They warned us to be careful, to watch the woods and listen to our instincts. Noden recovered slowly, but he never strayed far from my side after that night. The wounds on my ribs healed, leaving scars that served as a constant reminder of what lurked in the darkness. Charlie took to carrying his rifle everywhere, and we both installed better security lights around our properties. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind blows through the pines and shadows move across the walls, I think about those eyes, intelligent, ancient, and hungry. I think about how thin the line is between our world and whatever dark place that creature came from. And I wonder if it's still out there, waiting for another chance to cross that line. The old stories say that once these beings find a way into our world, they never truly leave. They just wait, patient and eternal, for the right moment to emerge again. So I keep my knife sharp, my rifle loaded, and I watch the woods because I know now that my grandfather was right. There are things in this world that can't be explained, things that live in the shadows between what we know and what we fear. This excerpt continues the gripping narrative of eerie events unfolding in a remote, wooded area. The writer describes a mysterious creature, its offspring, and a confrontation between the creature and the community members, invoking an ancient ceremony to send the creature back to its own realm. The story also introduces Haran Taga, a member of the Mohawk Nation, who faces increasing unsettling occurrences in the forest surrounding his reservation. The sudden and unexplained disappearance of people and the disturbing silence in the woods suggest something unnatural at work. The tension rises with the atmosphere of dread, the blending of traditional beliefs and modern skepticism, and the creeping realization that something dangerous is lurking, unnoticed by most, but increasingly felt by those who are aware. The story promises a deeper, possibly supernatural mystery unfolding as more disappearances occur, and Haran begins to reconsider the old stories of his ancestors, realizing their relevance in this seemingly unexplained crisis. Moment. Her eyes distant as she gazed out at the woods, her fingers lightly tracing the edge of the blanket. "The hungry one," she said softly. "It's not just a creature, Harlan. It's a thing that has existed long before our people. Something older than time itself, that knows the forest and the ways of the world better than any of us." I felt a chill run down my spine as the weight of her words settled in. Why is it here now? Why is it waking up? She met my gaze, her eyes dark and serious. Because we've forgotten. Our ancestors made agreements with the things of this land, things we shouldn't have disturbed. We thought we could ignore them, live as if they didn't exist. But they've been here, waiting for us to slip, for us to forget the old ways. I swallowed hard, feeling the leather pouch against my chest, its warmth now strangely reassuring. And what now? Is it over? Can it come back? Martha's expression softened, but there was a deep, unshakable fear in her eyes. It's not over. Not yet. You've seen it, and now it knows you're watching. The cycle has begun again, Harlan. But the silence is what you have to fear most. When it falls again, you'll know. You'll feel it before it even begins. When you hear it, you need to run. Fast. And don't look back. I felt the weight of her warning sink into me, but my thoughts were racing. What if I can't outrun it? Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she gave a sad, knowing shake of her head. Then remember the old ways. The silence will be the signal. And if you can't escape, you need to fight. But you can't fight it alone. This thing, it's not just a predator, it's a force. We may have beaten it back this time, but it's patient, and it's not the only one. I sat there with her in silence for a long time, the weight of her words pressing down on me. The creature had been killed, but that didn't mean it was gone forever. And even as the world seemed to settle back into a deceptive calm, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The night that followed was quiet, the usual sounds of the woods eerily absent. But that silence, unnatural, oppressive, still clung to me like a shroud, a constant reminder of the horrors lurking in the unseen corners of the world. And as I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that the hungry one wasn't finished with me yet. This text reads like a gripping supernatural tale rooted in folklore and steeped in mystery. It delves into themes of tradition, protection, and the balance between the natural and supernatural worlds. The narrator's journey is one of both personal and cultural discovery, as they confront an ancient creature tied to the land and the laws that govern it. The story begins with an eerie and menacing silence descending upon the forest, which signals the arrival of a dangerous creature. This creature is part of a long-standing pattern of disappearances in the woods, tied to an ancient curse or law. The protagonist learns that their family's bloodline holds power, both protective and vulnerable, as they come into contact with this dark force. The creature is shown to be more than just a predator. It's a force of nature, a creature tied to a web of rituals, boundaries, and laws older than humanity itself. The turning point is when the protagonist is forced to confront the creature in a sacred burial ground, utilizing ancient rituals and their ancestral heritage. The tension escalates as they face not only the creature, but also the realization that they may have to sacrifice themselves to stop the cycle of hunger and darkness. By the end of the story, though the immediate threat has been vanquished, the protagonist's world is forever altered. The old ways are revived, and the forest, with all its secrets, continues to watch, waiting for the next chapter in this haunting saga. It's a powerful narrative blending horror, family legacy, and the importance of preserving cultural traditions. The pacing and development of the relationship between the protagonist and their community is excellent, making it feel both personal and universally relevant. The atmosphere is heavy with tension, making it a compelling read that leaves you wondering about the stories that hide in the shadows.